about now?
Yep, looks good.
Okay,
Oh yeah.
excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I am totally fine with folks just popping in to add things as they need to. And yeah.
Perfect. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name's Michaela Kukin. I'm a member fulfillment specialist here at WiscNet. I'm joined by my colleague Ivor. Wanted to start off by saying thank you all so much for joining us today on this kind of gloomy Wednesday. A few housekeeping things. The session is going to be recorded and emailed to all registrants. And we'll also be leaving some time at the end for questions. So feel free to drop those in the chat, but also feel free to unmute as Cass is presenting, and we'll answer them in the moment. So last summer, Cassandra Hill, Digital Inclusion Coordinator at the City of Madison, joined us to chat a little bit about digital inclusion. And during that, she hinted that there was a little bit of a part two to her presentation. And so we invited her back to hear the rest. So with that, I'll hand things over.
Great. Thanks, Michaela. I appreciate it. Can everybody, first of all, hear me okay? Yes. And then can everybody see my screen in regular view? Fantastic. So hey, folks, for anyone who doesn't have visual access to me right now, I am a white, middle-aged woman with brown hair and green glasses, and I am wearing a gold and black turtleneck sweater. I have a virtual background that is a digitized drawing of the City of Madison as viewed from our beautiful Lake Monona down here. And I'm really happy to be here today. So I want to echo what Michaela said, just that if you have any questions, please feel free. You can raise your hand and hopefully one of them will be able to see that. And please, at any point, feel free to just interject as well. Or you can pop your comments into the chat. I do want to also note, for those of you that can see me, that I am working with 3 monitors here. So if you see me looking to the side at different points, just know that it's just because I'm managing different monitors and what's happening on each of them. So before I dive into part 2 of what I was really excited to share about related to digital inclusion, I want us to just do some level setting with fundamentals related to digital inclusion so that we're all on the same page as we talk about digital inclusion moving forward today. So the first thing I want to do is just address the work that we do related to digital inclusion, right? So when we talk about digital inclusion, the digital divide is the issue that we're addressing. And the digital divide is simply the gap between those who have affordable access, skills, and support to effectively engage online and those who don't. And digital equity is the goal that we're working toward, right? So that's a reality in which all individuals and communities have the information and technology skills and access needed for full and meaningful inclusion in their societies and their economies. So that's what digital equity, the state that we work towards, is. And digital inclusion is simply the work that we do to get there, to bridge this digital divide, to lessen it as much as we can, and then to reach digital equity at some point. So I do just want to quickly go through some pillars of digital inclusion that we talked about last time. I've been having a little trouble with my animations in the PowerPoint, so I am going to go through to the next slide and just select a few times here to get everything up there. So as we talk about digital inclusion, you know, we often hear about it as a 3-legged stool. So if you've ever talked to somebody who's worked in digital inclusion, they might have told you there are 3 prongs to digital inclusion, right? There's internet access, there's access to devices, and there's digital literacy. And yes, absolutely, those are aspects of digital inclusion. In fact, digital inclusion today looks a little bit more like a 5-pillar approach. So it's really about holding up and sustaining the whole person and their wellness in our increasingly digital world. And that encompasses some things in addition to those original pillars of internet access, devices, and digital literacy, though those are still the basic fundamental aspects of digital inclusion that need to be considered. So the first pillar of digital inclusion is connectivity, and this involves affordable and reliable internet at high speeds. It's a fundamental necessity for participation and thriving, really in all areas of life. And it includes, participation and thriving in healthcare, government, education, the economy, and so on. And the second pillar is access. So, in order for individuals to participate in modern life, right, they have to have access to affordable and reliable technology like computers and tablets and smartphones. The third pillar is adoption and technical support. So, areas with high connectivity can have a lot of households that have computers in them, right? But they can still lag in terms of adoption rates for high speed internet versus, in the olden days, dial up broadband. And secure tech support to help them if any issues arise with those things. And that's where we oftentimes with adoption and tech support can have a lot of challenges that face us, is because it's great if you have the connectivity and it's great if you have the devices and access to those devices. Do you have the ability to use those devices comfortably, confidently, and also to fix something that might happen with those devices that you wouldn't traditionally know how to fix? Which ties a little bit into pillar 4, which is digital skills. And these skills really empower individuals to use the tools that improve their lives and to use them in a way that's going to be most beneficial to them, right? So oftentimes, when we think about digital skills, folks have a wide range of digital skills in their repertoire, right? So digital parts of their digital toolkit, things that they can draw from. Some folks are very, very tech savvy. Some folks know all of the new software and they download or use anything new when it comes out. Other folks are a little more cautious, or maybe don't even really know how to get on the internet and find what they need there. So when we talk about digital skills, we're talking about that effective technology use. And we have a lot of assumptions about who it is that maybe needs greater skills with technology and who doesn't. So, for example, we imagine that digital natives, right? Young people who grew up with tablets or with smartphones, that they might be amazing at creating TikTok videos. So we assume that because we don't know how to create a TikTok video, they must know how to do all of the other digital things too, right? Because they're young and that's what they do. When in reality, right, they may not know how to navigate Microsoft Outlook, which is a vital part of daily life in a lot of workplaces. And so these digital skills aren't just, you know, what separates somebody in terms of their ability to use a smartphone. It really is helping people upskill in all areas that are going to help them thrive. And the work in this area will never be done, right? So as new technologies emerge, people have to be upskilled to effectively and securely use those technologies to enhance their lives. And so the last pillar of digital inclusion, once we've reached that place of getting folks in touch with digital skills and getting them trained in digital skills and access to learning how to do that in a way that works for them, the last pillar of digital inclusion is a relatively new one in the landscape, and that is making sure that all content that's put out there is accessible and usable by everyone, regardless of their background and ability. And so this requires on the back end really intentional design and language choices that enable everyone to benefit from technology in, the digital world. And so together, these pillars encourage and enable that self-sufficiency, that participation, that collaboration. But the pillars of digital inclusion are only as effective as the ecosystems in which they operate. And so that's really what today's conversation is going to be about. But before we move on to talk about ecosystems for digital inclusion and how we reach digital equity, does anyone have any questions about anything we talked about so far, these baseline fundamentals? All right. Fantastic. I don't see any virtual hands up, so I am going to move on to the next slide. So when we talk about offering programs and services for digital inclusion, success really starts with a few things. It starts with awareness, with desire, with knowledge, with trust, and it can start with one person, right? It can start with me as an individual, really understanding digital inclusion and embedding it into the way in which I engage with technology and the way in which I encourage others to engage with technology. So, identifying or establishing those pillars of digital inclusion in your community, and allowing them to really bolster the technology landscape. It's really rooted in trust, right? Technologies can be frustrating. It can be beautiful and wonderful and also very frustrating. And it's constantly changing, right? It has a history sometimes of being used for nefarious or not so great things with not so great intentions. And so getting our community members, the folks that we work with regularly and serve, to feel confident when working with technology really does come down to that matter of trust. And in most cases, that trust happens because organizations of all kinds are providing digital inclusion programming, um, and also providing other services to community members, right? That oftentimes are staffed by members of the community themselves. And so that trust can get built. But that awareness, that desire, that knowledge, that trust, it starts with us, and then we can impart it to others. And so, as we think about the ways in which we approach digital inclusion, I want us to consider a couple of scenarios here. First scenario, consider this. A loved one mentions needing an affordable device. Where do you send this person for resources? Second consideration might be a work colleague doesn't understand how to use a new software that your organization has adopted, right? In your mind, can you think of how to get them assistance within your workplace for that? Your aging neighbors avoid finding a new doctor because everything's online and they don't use computers. I actually found myself in this situation last summer, right? How do you help them? How do you navigate that with them? Or maybe a student tells you that their home or their farm doesn't have broadband internet and the cell service isn't really great. We saw a lot of this during the pandemic, right? How do you support them? So these are the types of considerations that are really micro level when we talk about each of us having a role in the technological landscape we find ourselves uh, in helping to bridge that digital divide. And nobody has all the answers. I do this for a living and I don't even have all the answers, right? But it's about holding space to find those answers for folks. And so we'll talk about some ways that we can do that through our programming and through the services that we might offer to community members. So change certainly starts with awareness, with desire, with knowledge, with trust, but it's sustained with strong community-based strategy. And that's one of the things I want us to really focus on today. And I'm going to use some examples of things that we've done at the City of Madison. They are in no way the, for lack of better words, end all be all or golden ticket, right, as a way forward. But hopefully it will help give you some ideas of how you can sort of build a community-based strategy in your area, as well as adopting some of these things in your own daily work that you're doing around technology. So let's talk about digital inclusion ecosystems. So when we talk about digital inclusion and what this means for a community, for a city, for a region, a county, a state, the nation, right? It helps us to see the relationships between interconnected networks of digital inclusion organizations and resources. And ecosystem mapping is something that helps us do that. And so if you're wondering, right, what are the resources, what are the services, what are the programs out there? I wouldn't even know how to direct someone there. Ecosystem mapping can really assist with that. So the information that's gathered through digital inclusion ecosystem mapping can be used to create public facing tools such as a digital inclusion directory that helps people find, the support services that they might need. When I started in my position at the City of Madison, my role is very cross-functional, but my title is Digital Inclusion Coordinator at the city. And I told Sarah, who's our CIO and my supervisor, that the first priority in my work plan really needed to be surveying the digital divide and the digital ecosystem in Madison as it existed today. We had a lot of reports and a lot of work was done in this area that led to my position, to the role that I now fill, being funded by the city. That work was also done pre-pandemic. And so the information we had at that time changed dramatically from that time until I came in 2023. And so after connecting with as many folks as I could at the city and also who were doing work in this area, I really saw a pattern. And what I saw was that here in Madison, at least, we are a community that's, full of advocates and activists. Many communities are, but that is something that is very, very strong in our value system. And when one organization sees a need for the members of their community, they are very quick to jump and fill that need, which at face value is a beautiful thing, right? We can all say that that's a really fantastic thing. What can end up happening is that when they quickly stand up those resources to fill that need, but they're not aware of another need yet that's still going unmet, and then they find out that there are actually 5 other organizations already filling that need, and they just stood up a whole program for it. There has to be sort of this recalibration of, oh wow, okay, this need's actually already being filled in my community from 5 different places who are doing, a class a day. So there's one class every day that someone in the community could go to. Maybe this isn't where we funnel our resources, right? And so with that beautiful leaning towards advocacy and a desire to stand up services, comes the need to really map out strategically what those services might look like so that we're making sure that there aren't gaps in the services that we're offering to the folks that we work with and for our residents. So when there's not a cohesive picture of what's available, right, then we don't really have access to that. And so ecosystem mapping helps us get that access, and it helps us identify those gaps and allocate those resources to filling what those gaps might be. This isn't something that's done overnight. It's something that's done with a lot of conversation, a lot of strategizing, and a lot of something else that we'll talk about today, which is collaborations and partnerships. So an example, and I just want to show you so that you can see what an ecosystem mapping might look like. This is just one example. It's a lot happening on your screen. You don't necessarily need to read through every little bubble, and some of them have question marks because at the time this was created, I was still trying to figure out what some of those services and programs looked like. But essentially, this particular map was a draft of what we were able to find online. So as we did online searches for digital skill classes, workforce skills classes, health equity and medical records skills classes, all of the things that we could find on the internet in the city of Madison that serves residents in the areas of those digital literacy skills or digital skills, those affordable devices, right? What city specific programming as a government entity did we have related to that? What does the connections with broadband and ISPs look like? What do those service providers offer as affordable options for folks who need connectivity but maybe don't have the income to support that? So this is just one example of how we mapped out what we could find on the internet. But it didn't stop there. We also ended up anything that we couldn't find on the internet. If we heard about an organization, or if I heard from one community partner, oh yeah, and so does this, or I heard from folks in my neighborhood, oh, my cousin goes to this class at this place, and it's not something that we found. I through time was taking a lot of notes about that stuff and then finding ways to connect with those organizations to sit down and say, hey, I just want to get a sense of what you're doing in this area so that I can know how to direct folks best, and that we as a city can put some resources out with that. So what we ended up doing as the end goal of our project for this ecosystem mapping is we actually created a web page. And I apologize. I just realized that this map wasn't up on the screen. So I will give you all a second just to look at it really quickly, so that you can get a sense of what it looked like when we found what was available just through basic internet searches. This is just through searching the internet for what resources were available. What it ended up leading to after having those meetings, right, for anything we couldn't find online, doing that mass outreach, was our digital inclusion resources hub for Dane County. And it's housed on our Madison Public Library site. So I partnered with the library to develop this page. And it's essentially a hub for practitioners and our local digital navigators. And community and anchor institutions that serve our residents. And this particular hub, I'm going to pop into the chat in case anyone is interested. It is a very basic start to the, it's not wanting to copy for me. Give me one moment here. It's a very basic start to, you know what? I will pop that in the chat when we're done because it's not copying over for some reason into Zoom for me. So our digital inclusion resource hub is a start. It's just essentially a list in all of these areas. So who within Dane County offers any kind of training for digital skills and literacy? And it's not just training about how to use your iPhone, right? Or how to check mail on your iPhone, how to use your laptop. It's also training about how do you engage with Microsoft Office? How do you navigate professionalism via email, right? If you are a young person entering the workforce. So when we talk about digital literacy training, those are all topics that we're talking about. And workforce skills training is also a huge part of that. Also, what access exists for broadband that's out there for folks, who our ISPs are, what the affordable options are. The Lifeline program is a big piece of this, where folks can get a discount on their internet programs. And then also how folks can get devices. So our library has free for use devices that people can check out. It's not a solution to folks having their own devices that they can use whenever they need to, but it's a start. And DaneNet is one of our local providers that also does a lot of work related to this. So I will pop that, hopefully that into the chat, the link when I'm done presenting, and or Michaela can send it out for folks to take a look at. But this is just one example of how ecosystem mapping can create a resource hub for other folks to look to. And again, you know, we also know that this resource hub in and of itself isn't necessarily going to serve all of our residents and be enough. It will never be enough for our residents, right? We know that if someone doesn't have access to the internet, they can't look up where to go to learn about access to the internet, right? So there are also some ways in which we're trying to create flyers and other things that can go out, maybe even with some utility bills, and or that can be included, you know, in city buildings, so that folks can get physical copies of what they can get access to with phone numbers as well. And that's sort of why we built this hub, really with practitioners in mind, with the librarians, the members at our anchor institutions who are working with residents to show them how to use their MyChart, their Epic MyChart, if that's the medical system they're working with, right? The digital navigators who are working with our social workers to determine who should be getting access to low-cost devices. So this is sort of, this site is really for them. For me, when last year my neighbor said I had concerns about, you know, her doctor and didn't know how to get a new one, you know, without calling and being put on hold for however long. And then having to navigate all the questions they asked her on the phone was very overwhelming. Do you want us to send you a message in your MyChart? And she said, I don't know what a MyChart is. So there's all of these individuals, including us on this call today, that something like this in any area could actually benefit as we're talking with people about the resources available for them. I am going to see if I can now find that resource hub so I can pop it into the chat for us. And while I'm doing this, does anyone have any questions about ecosystem mapping or how it might play out in your organization or, in the area, the geographic area that you find yourself in?
Yeah, if you have questions, don't be shy. Unmute yourselves and ask them. Doesn't sound like it.
Okay, fantastic. So I did just pop into the chat the digital inclusion resource hub that we have. It's ever evolving, that we're updating it once a quarter, but we have seen, I think traffic started the first month that launched. We saw, I want to say more than 50 people visit the site. And since then, we've had over 120 people visit the site. And so that doesn't sound like huge numbers, but that's 120 people who have a one-stop shop for all of the things that we as a city could compile. We also have a place on the site where any provider who comes across the site who offers these services and isn't included for whatever reason can connect with me, and then we can make sure that in the next quarter of updates, they're added to the list and their services are added to the list. So it's an ongoing conversation with our providers as well. So essentially, when we talk about ecosystem mapping, that really can only be as effective as the relationships that we're building with other people who are doing this work in our areas. With digital inclusion, right, there's this concept of collective impact. So a collective impact approach is one way to approach resource allocation and management in digital inclusion ecosystems. And it brings community and then cross-sector, really, stakeholders together to collectively define a problem. In our case, right, for digital inclusion, that's the digital divide. What does it look like? How are we defining it? And to create a shared vision to solve it. And that visioning is sort of where we're at in our ecosystem in Madison, simply because there are so many entities that have had specific pockets of this stood up for so long, right? Like digital skills classes or access to affordable devices, that what they're doing is working. And so getting folks to come together at the table to talk about, we have these amazing things that are working. How can we collectively address these things that we're not doing to meet resident needs still? Because there's only so much that, resource wise, a city, a municipality can do. There's only so much one nonprofit can do. There's only so much one neighborhood or community center, right, can do. One library system. So looking at these collectives, right, what they tend to do is have collaborations or coalitions. And with collaborations and coalitions, collaboration, y'all are probably familiar with this, is partnering or laboring together towards a common goal. And coalitions are a form of collaboration. So really, with common or shared resources achieving a goal, many collaborations exist to advance digital inclusion in a lot of areas. Chances are that wherever you find yourselves today, physically being, geographically being, that there is potentially a collaboration happening in your area. It might be between a library and a hospital system. It might be between, the municipal government and an update to their website that's coming to make it more inclusive and usable for folks. And the digital navigator who's in the area offering feedback from residents about how a municipality can make that more usable for their residents, more easily navigated. So, they include lots of different types of partnerships. And a coalition is a really great resource, but it tends to be a type of collaboration that's a little more formalized. And it usually involves joint purpose and action for a fixed amount of time. So we're going to form a coalition. This coalition is going to have, this type of impact and they're going to influence this type of target. And with that, here are the KPIs, here are the success indicators for that coalition and for the work that they're doing together. So coalitions pop up, and strong collaboration is how these coalitions can pop up and get work done that needs to be done to be able to serve members of our communities. So these coalitions and collaborations, they do several things, right? We talked in the beginning about those trusted relationships, and it's through these trusted relationships that we strengthen our messages and our programs. I came into the City of Madison in 2023, having lived outside of the state of Wisconsin for many years before that, in a completely different role. And, I couldn't just come in and say, this is what we're doing for digital inclusion. I needed to do a lot of listening, a lot of responding to folks, a lot of surveying the landscape, and a lot of connecting with community partners and the people they were serving to understand what the city's role was now going to be in relation to digital inclusion, and to understand where, instead of replacing work that's already being done, where we could come in and supplement the work that's being done. And our community partners, organizations like DaneNet, like the Literacy Network, right? Organizations like Mount Zion and the Senior Center. Those organizations have those trusted relationships with community partners. I don't. And so it's a relationship where we can work together to try and find ways to collaborate and meet needs and strengthen the messaging and programming that's coming out about digital access, digital resources for our communities. They also offer resources and support as they sort of strengthen or bolster advocacy. So, one entity alone might not be able to offer all of the resources available. And because of that, right, having a connection with the other people doing this work in our area is really important. And it's also important that the current infrastructure of an organization or of a region, whatever your situation might be, that infrastructure is understood, and that the voices that are part of that infrastructure, as many as possible and as many as want to be, are at the table, right? And having the capacity to also add to the current infrastructure around technology, digital inclusion, digital access, and occasionally, in a necessary way, having the ability to disrupt that infrastructure when it's not serving in the ways that it needs to. So there's a lot of levels and a lot that coalitions and collaborations around digital inclusion can do. So with collaborations and coalitions, when we talk about ecosystem mapping, there are a few things that we can move from an ecosystem map into further benefits for our communities in relation to digital inclusion, right? There are some methods that collaborations and coalitions can employ to be able to do that. One of them is creating a roadmap whenever possible, right? So sometimes you'll see this, you'll see, identifying the places that an organization, an entity, a collective or a coalition, or a city or a county have been. What was the road that led to digital inclusion and digital access being what it is for the people we serve today? What the current state is, and then really adopting a roadmap that identifies key goalposts and success indicators for helping the people we serve arrive where they need to be, with a realistic timeline for what that program or those services could be implemented within. So that roadmap can really help as we're talking about, what does digital inclusion look like in my community? What services are out there for folks? What role do I as an individual play, which we'll talk a little bit about in a moment as well. And also, what role does coalitions and does strong collaboration play in that? And, this roadmap, this ecosystem map, those will evolve, and they have to evolve with flexibility, right? Because things are going to change, organizations are going to restructure, systems are going to be introduced that are new. And so approaching ecosystems in this way can be really helpful when we think about digital inclusion and what's available to help the folks we serve. Understanding that it's flexible, ever evolving, iterative as we move forward. And also just really identifying the success stories. So, because those are the things that as we build these coalitions and these collaborations, at least for me, they're the things that keep us going, right? That one person at the senior center 2 weeks ago when I was in there, just seeing a class that was being done by DayNet in our senior center and supporting that class, watching that senior who had this new smartphone for I think it was like a month. He said he had this smartphone, and he was a wonderful older adult, right? Very accomplished. I believe he, had at least a master's degree. He was talking about the work that he did before he retired, and we're sitting there, we're halfway through the class. The instructor has been walking folks through things step by step. And halfway through the class, he speaks up and says, "Can someone just come over here and help me figure out how to turn this phone on?" And he'd had it for a month and he didn't know how to turn it on. And that's why he hadn't used it. These success stories, this person who was able to show up to this class that was held by a community partner in a city space, inviting residents from some of our public housing, that person was able to come and just do this one little thing that opened up a world of possibilities to them. And that's just one of 1,000 success stories, right? For some of us, it might be that student that we connect with a tablet to be able to use at home because family computer isn't going to work for them to write their papers on if their parent works from home and needs it at night to do some things related to the job. There's a lot of these success stories, and they're the things that really keep us going in a lot of ways. So I did just want to share a couple of resources that are out there for folks. The National Digital Inclusion Alliance, NDIA, has actually developed some incredible changes to their website and the content that they produce for folks. They now have a Digital Inclusion Coalition guidebook. If you work for an organization or entity that does anything to address the digital divide, and if you're in technology, I hope that's everyone, then understanding how you can build local coalitions or relationships that support your community members is really great. And this is a really great resource for that. The NDIA also just in the last couple months completely updated their website, and they now have an entire section of the website that is devoted to asset mapping, digital asset mapping. So what are the skills classes that are available? What are the organizations, where do I find a device? That's the digital asset, right? And so they have an entire portion of their page now that's devoted to that. And so that was really exciting to see earlier this year. So if you're interested in understanding even more about your organization and how digital inclusion operates in your organization, right? Looking at what training is available for employees, how are employees onboarded, right? I'll never forget the first time I heard someone say to me, "Oh, I'll ping you." And I thought, what do you mean you'll ping me? I don't know what that means, right? So there's these little ways that we forget that the digital divide can be present. So thinking about even on a smaller scale, how it operates in your organization. And the other thing I wanted to mention with this group, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but just in case you aren't, we do have a Wisconsin Digital Equity Stakeholders Group. I know that at least one or two folks in this session right now are a part of that group, and it's really a space where we can learn what others near or far in Wisconsin are doing around digital equity and digital inclusion. We get important information and updates about, grant opportunities. So if you're interested in standing something up in your area, right, that might be a good place to learn about funding opportunities. It's also a great place to connect with a community of practice and just sort of hear what other folks are doing. for me, it's been really insightful to just know about the work that's being done and also to think about, okay, so they did this over in Racine or up in Forest County, right? Steve's working on this particular item. What could that look like at the City of Madison? What could that look like for the school district or, for any number of other entities? And so really connecting with that community of practice is a really great thing. And it also is a great spot to hear about what's happening with local and state needs and what's happening with local and state policy around technology and digital equity and how technology impacts people's lives. So those are two resources that are fantastic. And I do want to dive just for a couple of minutes into the importance of data and analytics when it comes to digital inclusion, which seems counterintuitive because data and analytics sounds so niche and or niche and also incredibly targeted and industry laden, but it's such a vital part of understanding an ecosystem. Before I do that, though, did anyone have any questions or comments or thoughts about what this looks like in a community when organizations collaborate and work together to start to sort of bridge some of the digital divide? I am seeing something in the chat here, so I'm just going to navigate there. Appreciate that, Rachel. Thank you. All right. And we will, as you're processing and thinking about what this might mean for you, we can open up at the end for some questions as well. So let's talk about the necessary data and analytics that need to happen for us to really understand what the digital divide looks like in our home, in our neighborhood, in our broader communities, in our workplaces. We can sort of look around and take stock to understand what digital inclusion looks like. And when it comes to working in this area and making sure that we're developing digitally inclusive programs, services, and spaces, there are a few things we can do with data that's really important. So what you want to do is, as you engage in surveying your digital inclusion landscape, you want to make your data your constant companion in a way. And data tells a story. It's a powerful story, albeit a limited version of what that story might be. So, we can rely on the American Community Survey each year to give us demographic information, but we also understand that that survey is a sampling of 3% of the population, right? That's not a representative. It's what we have and it's what we draw from, but it's not a representative sample of the reality of what life is like in a particular neighborhood in the city of Madison, right? What their broadband is like, what other things are like. But it's a good start. And, the last census, for example, excellent data, but it also was during the pandemic. And we all know that from 2020 till now, right, that landscape changed dramatically. And so things look very different from the last time census came out, right? An educator or a librarian might hear a story from a student or a resident highlighting the digital divide in rich detail, but that doesn't necessarily help us establish objective patterns of access and use. When we look at all of these things put together and we assess them and we ask questions about them and we go back to the communities that we're looking at or the structures that we're looking at, the systems we're looking at, and ask follow-up questions, right? What ends up happening is that all of this data together paints a really vivid picture for us that we can draw from. And that data, if used openly and wisely, can help funnel resources in the most effective way. So when we talk about data and analytics, as you start considering what digital inclusion and the ecosystem of that might look like in your community, just a few things, right? Use your data strategically. So if you gather information about however many students are experiencing X or whatever neighborhood has fewer megabytes per second than another neighborhood, any of these things that are traditional digital inclusion, right? One neighborhood has 4 senior centers and one neighborhood has none. As we look at that data, right, it can be really eye-opening and in some cases surprising. So we might learn that while we thought digital natives or young people were not something we needed to target for digital inclusion or digital skills or workplace skills, they may be some of the folks we need to target the most, right? So really taking a look at how we can use data strategically, what the data tells us, and then using that data to identify the gaps and then allocate resources associated with that, right? So making that connection between the work and the current need. And part of this is for those of us who work with technology to tie data collection around that technology into our strategic priorities as organizations and as systems. So if we have these strategic priorities of X, Y, and Z, right? Let's say at the City of Madison, one of them is to really level up our accessibility of our website for residents. We have, I think we're at 89 to 92% compliance with our web pages for accessibility. But that still leaves out 8%. So there's 8% of what's up there that folks in our community can't access. And so really looking at that data and saying, all right, we're at, whatever, 92% now. And then by X date, we're going to take the steps to get to 99% conformance with accessibility standards. Then that is, right, a really great way that we can make connections between the work that our IT folks are doing on a regular basis and the digital inclusion, the residents, right? That digital equity that we're trying to bring to the residents so that they can have the same access, every resident, regardless of their background. So it helps to connect the dots when you're talking about a program or a resource to show the stakeholders how it's serving a real and current expressed need in the community. And as you consider data and sharing it out, really involving the people that the data represents is crucial. We're still, I can honestly and openly say at the city, I'm still figuring out how to do that. There's only so much time in the day, but I do a lot of connecting with organizations or entities such as when we talk about accessibility, our Disability Rights Commission, right? We're going to have a training plan for our city staff that's developed that essentially is a model for letting folks know, or hey, if you're employed at the city, part of your training, your onboarding, if you're not being onboarded, new training for you is going to include how to make documents accessible, because we can't be sending documents to our residents if they're not accessible, because that means that there are residents who can't get the information that they need in a timely fashion. And that's not something that aligns with our values as a city. And so, developing this training plan for our city staff and then taking it to our Disability Rights Commission for feedback. Hey, we have this plan. Here's the feedback we're hoping to get. Can you talk with residents? Can you connect with them, right? These are ways that we can collect resident feedback without having to go door to door. Though canvassing is certainly an effective tool as well, if you're just really unsure about what things look like or the state of things, right? So essentially, that sort of follows this model of nothing for us without us, right? We shouldn't be developing policy, programs, resources, and technologies for people without having the voices of some of those people at the table. So that's definitely something to consider when it comes to data and analytics. Oftentimes we think of data and analytics as someone behind a computer running and crunching a bunch of numbers, but it's so much more than that. And it's something that can really inform how we're working and engaging with our community members. And so just to sort of tie up before I share a few resources with you, as we talk about embedding digital inclusion, there are ways we can do this in our daily work, in strategic planning and policy, and in the adoption of new technologies, right? So maybe you're in a role right now where this is new to you. What is digital inclusion? There's a lot of conversations happening at the federal level about DEI initiatives. Digital inclusion isn't something that's centered on any one type of human or any one type of human experience. Every time a new technology or a new software application is released, digital inclusion is a part of that because people have to learn how to use that technology and navigate it if it's going to help them or be effective for them. And so it sits in a little bit of a different pocket of the universe than some of these other very important, but also in some ways really heavily monitored areas of equity and inclusion. So digital inclusion really affects every single human being who engages in digital spaces. Particularly in our country, oftentimes people have to engage in digital spaces, whether they want to or not, to be able to live their lives effectively. So maybe right now, let's say coalitions or ecosystem mapping isn't feasible with what resources you have available, because it does honestly feel like these days a lot of us are being asked to do more with less. But there are other things that we can do to embed this into our lives, right? We can establish it in our daily work. We can consider things like, all right, what is the usability of this digital thing that I am passing on to a colleague, that I'm passing to a student, that I am creating and developing behind the scenes? What's the audience need for this? Is this a business need or is it truly a human audience need? And just considering that, just having that conversation at the table doesn't mean you have to have an answer or that one answer is right or wrong, but just considering it is a part of incorporating digital inclusion into your daily work. Whether what we're putting out can be accessed by all individuals, regardless of their ability, right? Can we put things in a plainer language so that the average person can understand them? How many people, select terms or accept terms and conditions without reading them? I'm sure all of us have been in that position. I know I'm guilty of that. And oftentimes those terms and conditions aren't written in a way that the average user can even understand what they're engaging with anyway. And that's one of the reasons we just bypass it. So, thinking about ways that we can start to bridge that divide for folks can be really important. We might be able to show a colleague how to collaborate with a new tool that's being used at the office, or a neighbor how to find their utility bill online. And maybe it's also to sort of be that voice that says, hey, I'm noticing an accessibility issue here, right? Maybe this feature that we're putting out or this network that we're building out isn't necessarily able to be accessed by everyone with all levels of background. And, for strategic planning, we can ask, how do we address the new or widening digital divide? Are we prepared to support any unanticipated results? Do we build digital inclusion into our strategic technology planning? For policy, how do we safeguard our strategic priorities while also aligning with our values? How do we discuss the equity impacts of the work that we're doing? How, with adoption of new technologies, how do we ask the hard questions, not being afraid to ask those hard questions, given the strategy and policy questions, given the values, is this the right tool at the right time with the right technical standards for what we're trying to adopt? Or is it the easiest or the most popular or the most economically advantageous option? And again, none of those answers, there's not a right or wrong here. There are things we can be doing to consider embedding digital inclusion if we're not necessarily in a place to be building community engagement and coalitions. And I know we're coming up on time. I want to offer the opportunity. I didn't have any as we went along, but if anyone has any questions, but I also just wanted to share that there are many resources that are out there for folks that can help you assess the digital divide in your community. There are tools that can help you make sure that any websites are accessible, that can help you learn how to put things into plain language. You can sign up to join the Digital Equity Stakeholders Group. All of these are resources that are available for folks to be able to do that. And then last, just a reminder that again, this work will never be done. Technology advances rapidly, and part of our job is to keep pace with it while also making sure that those we work with and serve are able to access it and have what they need. So part of really, really addressing that is building digital inclusion into our everyday lives and our everyday work. I'd love to answer any questions folks have. I know this was a lot.
As people potentially think of questions or anything like that, I did just want to say that Cass is also going to be at WiscNet Connections at Century World in Stevens Point this year, giving the full presentation. So be sure to sign up for that to see both parts, or bring someone from your organization with you that you think could benefit from this information, along with all of the other presentations that are going to be going on at WiscNet Connections. Each member receives a complimentary ticket to our WiscNet Connections this year, but since you attended today, you can have another free ticket. I'm pasting that code in the chat there. So use that and you can get another free ticket on us. So bring someone else from your organization. And there also are still rooms available. So definitely register. Our next Teach and Learn won't be until June. It'll be June 18th. So just keep an eye out for that email whenever it comes, and I will send out the recording and any other resources and links in the post email within the next week. But feel free to reach out to us during that time or at any time. Did anyone have any last minute questions that they thought of for Cass?
Well, thank you all for
All
the
right.
time today. This has been really great to be able to come and just talk about some of the things. It's not every day you get to sit down and talk about some of the things you're passionate about. So thank you for holding space for that today. And I'm keen to hear from some of you about your interest in this and what your work around this might be. But in the meantime, between now and WiscNet Connections, wishing you all the best.
Wonderful. All right. Thanks for coming, Cass, and talking to our members. All right. Well, have a great rest of the week, everyone. Bye.